Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Glad to have you back. So in today's episode, we are going to do kind of a overview of the Paris Climate Accord. So there's been a lot of talk about the Paris Climate Accord since it came into existence some almost 10 years ago now. Obviously, it happened in Paris, hence the name Paris Climate Accord. And the idea behind the Paris Climate Accord was for the nations of the world to get together and come up with some type of a plan of attack to attack climate change and the effects of climate change on the earth. So that's the whole point of it. Sounds good, but we wanted to do a more fact based look at what is it? What is it trying to accomplish? Is it actually accomplishing that? And should we pay attention to it? So I think you'll see from the notes that it's not a huge initiative. It tries to paint itself as a huge initiative, but it's really a paper tiger from our perspective. But let's go through the facts. Let's go through the analysis of it, and you can make your own assumptions and do your own research on it. But I would encourage you to do your own research on it because I wouldn't say surprised, but what I found doesn't make me think it's super important. So, a Paris Agreement is a legal, so they stress this on every website I looked at, a legally binding international treaty. Legally binding to what? Who knows? So there's nothing in there. A legally binding treaty that aims to limit global warming. The agreement was adopted in the 2015 UN Climate Change Conference in Paris and entered into force in 2016. Okay, so let's get a couple things out of the way right up front. Yes, climate change happens. Yes, there's no doubt that the man made activities of burning fossil fuels has contributed to climate change in some way. I would argue that it's impossible to tell how much man made activity has impacted the climate. There's lots of models, but they're exactly that. They're models. There are tons and tons of assumptions made in these models. The mathematics is such that you can change a couple of variables and get a very different output from any one of these models. So if you use a very pessimistic view, and it's okay to use a pessimistic view of what's going to happen to the climate and how much carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere, et cetera, you can make those models spit out very pessimistic views, very negative views. And there's nothing wrong with taking a pessimistic view to try to do what we can to save the earth. And I don't even know, so I want to retract that statement. Save the earth is not the right way to say it. To make our climate better is the right way to say it. So if you think about how our earth started, at one point our earth was nothing but volcanoes and ash and lava, and it was molten, and it has evolved over millions, if not billions of years to come to the state that it is in now. So the earth is very, very self correcting. So I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I was 8 years old on May 18th, 1980, when Mount St. Helens erupted and destroyed hundreds of square miles of forest, of towns, of all sorts of things that were in the path of the volcanic eruption. And we were able to drive up as soon as they reopened kind of the blast zone around Mount St. Helens and see that devastation firsthand. Well, that was what, 44 years ago now? So go back there now. Life is regenerated, forests have regenerated. All that had nothing to do with man. It was a volcano which was much more powerful than anything man can come up with. And the earth has healed itself up there. So, do I think we should just wantonly disregard our impact on the environment? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that all the doom and gloom predictions that you hear about the world reaching a tipping point 7 years from now and the world becoming uninhabitable is bullshit. I can't say it more clearly than that. It's false. That's not going to happen. It's just not true. Now, with that said, we should be doing things that make sense to protect our environment. What does not make sense is to stop using fossil fuels. It's a very Western view of things. If you look at most of the world lives on less electricity than it takes to run your refrigerator every day. and we are spoiled with where we're at. And we're going to look at some statistics at the bottom of this or at the end of this that show that it's actually cold weather that kills far more people than warm weather. And that's across the world. That's in every model. That's in every study. So don't listen to this doom and gloom bullshit because it's false. So what does the Paris Accord attempt to do? What are its stated goals? So it's got temperature goals. The countries agreed to limit the increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and ideally 1.5 degrees. Okay, great. So we're going to control the weather. That's the plan. Sounds good. You can tell this is a government program just by that goal. We're going to limit the temperature increase of the world. It's such a ridiculous thing to talk about. Should we look at the activities that we partake in and the impact they have in the environment? Sure, of course, absolutely. Totally agree. And I'm all for wind, solar, hydro, all of the alternative forms of energy, geothermal. I think we should explore all of those. Now, with that said, if you have any understanding of the amount of electricity that's used in the world now and the amount that would be necessary to bring other areas of the world, other areas being, call it sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of Asia, parts of Europe, hell, parts of the United States. You know, people don't live that great in Appalachia. I don't know if you've ever been through, but I have. It's not awesome in some of those spots. I live in Cleveland, Ohio. There's spots in Cleveland, Ohio where people live without plumbing, without power, without heat. That happens in the town I live in. And that's a tough way to live. So the whole point is the more energy we can produce, the higher quality of life we're going to produce for the people of the world. And the way to get there right now is not to limit the use of fossil fuels. We should be doing it as clean, as intelligent as possible, but far more people die from cold than from heat. And that's across the board in every area of the world, even areas with extreme heat. It's crazy, but we'll get into that. Emissions reductions. Countries submitted national climate action plans to reduce their emissions. So in essence, what happened is a bunch of countries got together and said, I promise to reduce my emissions. Literally, that's what the Paris Climate Accord is. It has absolutely no teeth, no mechanism by which there is enforcement. There's nothing to hold countries accountable. In fact, they self-report their results, and they're supposed to update their plans every 5 years. Well, the first 5 years, almost nobody did. Almost nobody updated their plans. And the self-reporting has happened by less than half of the countries that are in the Paris Accord. So this whole thing is all for show. It's virtue signaling. It's smoke and mirrors. It is showmanship. That's all that it is. Transparency. Countries agreed to report on their progress towards their target. That sounds good, but they're not doing it. Climate finance. Countries agreed to provide climate finance to help vulnerable countries reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. So if you didn't pick up the buzzwords in there, climate finance. What the hell is climate finance? If you need money to build power plants, that's finance. It's not climate finance, it's finance. Vulnerable countries. Which country is it that's not vulnerable to the weather that it exists in? That's all of them, by the way. Now, if you think about some countries that have less resources than we do, sure, got it. But we got people in our country that don't have heat. We got people in our country that live without water. We got people in our country that live without electricity. So the whole thought process behind this is it's such a government program. This is a great example of why you should inspect any government program, because most of them have all sorts of bullshit in them like this. Net zero emissions. The agreement aims to reach global net zero emissions in the second half of the next century. Okay, sounds good. Like, okay, how do we do that? Good luck. How are these goals measured and enforced? Again, countries are supposed to self-report their results. They don't. Less than half of the countries that are in this have reported any results. You're supposed to update your goals every 5 years. Less than half of the countries have done that. Hell, there's a couple countries that haven't even ratified the thing in their internal government structure to this point. So the Paris Accord is pure showmanship. It is absolute farce. It has no teeth. And that is why when Trump was president, he withdrew us from the Paris Accord. He looked at it and said, wait, we're making a bunch of promises that are going to hurt us economically, they're going to hurt us financially, and the rest of these countries, these are jokes. They didn't. They committed to where they're at now, meaning their emissions levels were here. Their commitment was to maintain those. Their commitment was to not let them grow. But we're supposed to take a big haircut, and we're supposed to spend a whole bunch more money on electricity and on gasoline and on heat and on cooling. It's unbelievable when you dig into it. This thing has no teeth. There is no mechanism in the agreement for enforcement. Nothing happens if you don't hit your goals. There's no fine. You're not sanctioned by the United Nations or whoever, the Global Monetary Fund, whatever, governing body is supposed to be overseeing this thing. It has no teeth. It means nothing. So other than that, other than the fact that the commitments are bullshit, that it's self-reporting, so the only one that can tell on you is you, and there's no mechanism by which to enforce it. Other than that, it's a great plan. I think it's awesome. So on the Paris Accord, don't waste your time on it. It's an absolute waste of time. It's nonsense. It means nothing. It's a farce. So don't pay attention to it. Now, with that said, one of the things I came across in the research for this, which I found very interesting, and I had a hunch about this, and it proved out to be right. How many people die from extreme temperatures every year? And so I think, at least for me, when I think about extreme temperatures, you think of someone dying of hypothermia because they're out in minus 10 degree temperature, or they die of heat stroke because they're exposed to 120 degree temperature and they just keel over because their body overheats. That's actually not how most people die from temperature exposure. Most of them are from suboptimal temperature, so 50 degrees, 45 degrees, 85 degrees, 90 degrees, and they're exposed to these things in a weakened state. By far, the vast majority of people that die from these things are elderly people. So their immune system's already weakened. They're not as strong as someone in the prime of their life, and they succumb to exposure to suboptimal temperatures. So with all that said, the estimates around how many people die like that every year, they vary. The estimates vary based on the methodological differences in the studies, the data quality in the studies, and the assumptions about how people respond to changes in temperature. Meaning, so I spent 15 years in New Hampshire. I'm used to the cold. Like, I'm going to be more comfortable in the cold than someone that's not used to it. It's the old moving from Phoenix to New Hampshire, or moving from New Hampshire to Phoenix. I'm going to be way more uncomfortable in the summer than a Phoenix native because they're used to the very hot weather in the summer. So I'm probably more at risk in the heat than I am in the cold because I've spent so much of my life in cold weather climates. But with all that said, no matter the estimates, it's not a small number. So the estimates in these various studies and groups that monitor these things or try to put a number on these things vary between 1.7 to 5 million people. So, it's significant. That's a lot of people. Now, with that said, there's, 8.5 billion people in the world. So statistically, it's not a huge number. Like, it's a rounding error in the overall population of the world. But that sounds crass to say when you're talking about between 1.7 and 5 million people. So it's definitely something we should pay attention to, and definitely something that we should do what we can to resolve. And I say do what we can because one of the things I heard during COVID was, if it even saves one life, no, that's false. Like, locking all kids out of school saved one life, so it was worth doing? No, it was not. Shutting down our economy saved one life, so it was worth doing? No, it's not. That's false. That's emotion speaking, not reason. And we want to be reasoned, well thought people making decisions based on data. So when the data says it's a small number of people are impacted by temperature when it comes to mortality. So we still should look at it, and still there's probably instances where we could do better and extend some of those people's lives. That's the other thing I say when we talk about saving a life. We talk like life is infinite. You don't save a life, you extend it. They get more time. But we've all got it coming. We've talked about it on this channel before. In fact, it's one of the tricks we use to keep a positive mental attitude and push through adversity is that 100 years from now, we're all going to be dead. None of this is going to matter. We're going to be worm food, or we'll be back in the environment as, carbon and nitrogen and all the little elements that make up our body. We'll all be gone. It doesn't matter. So you don't actually save a life, you extend a life. And that's good. We should do that where we can, but not at the expense of trashing our country's economy or trashing the world's economy, because people are scared of climate change. And it's a ghost. You're chasing a ghost. It's the boogeyman. And we shouldn't let it rule the way some folks want to let it rule our policy decisions. So, with all that said, of those deaths, 1.7 to 5 million people, of those deaths, cold-related deaths far outnumber heat-related deaths in every country, without exception. So globally, cold-related deaths are 9 times higher than heat-related deaths. In no region is this ratio less than 3 to 1. And in many, it's over 10 times higher. Meaning, in no region in the world is the ratio of cold deaths to deaths caused by cold versus deaths caused by heat less than 3 to 1. That's in Africa. That's in Arizona. That's in insert hot climate here. Every climate in the world, the cold deaths are higher than the warm deaths by 3 to 1. In many places, it's 10 times higher. So I would argue that, in fact, fossil fuels save way more lives than they cost. Because if you think about our environment, what do you do to control your environment? You go indoors. You go indoors where we can control light, where we can control heat, where we can control temperature, where we can control exposure to the elements. So it is the fossil fuels that have made the world a much more habitable place than living in the environment. So again, should we do things that make sense to protect our environment and protect the earth? Of course, without a doubt. But we should not be making these rash, huge decisions costing billions, if not trillions of dollars in the name of the greater good, because it's not the greater good. It is man-made, fossil fuel powered electricity and heat and plumbing that make our world habitable. So it's the exact opposite of what gets preached everywhere. So I found all that interesting. I've never been a proponent of this scare tactic that's used by the climate activists that are the most vocal. And again, I am in full support that we should look at common sense things that help us protect our environment and make the world cleaner, will last longer, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the world is self-healing. So even if we all drop dead tomorrow, the world would continue and it would reclaim all of the cities that we've built. All of those things would be absorbed back into nature and things would go to their natural state, which I would argue again would be much less habitable than man-made environments. That's why people live in cities and they don't live in forests or jungles or deserts or whatever harsh natural environment exists out there. It is the man-made fossil fuel powered cities and safe spaces that make our world habitable. So keep that in mind when you hear people talking about climate, when you hear climate alarmists. It's just not true. It's just not true, the things that we're talking about. Is it true that the climate is changing? Yes. Is it true that man-made factors are contributing to it? Yes. Is it true that we're going to make it so bad that the world will not be habitable? No, absolutely not. 100% false. I can guarantee you that's 100% false. So keep all that in mind, guys, when you're making your decisions, when you're choosing which policies to support, when you're choosing how to communicate with others and how to think about this particular topic. If you found that useful, I love putting this episode together. Anytime I can kind of point out the flaw in conventional mainstream thinking, I love doing that. And this one is, to me, it's very clear that the mainstream narrative is just a scare tactic that's used to get clicks, to raise money, to try to get conformity out of other parts of society. we don't have to worry about this shit the way they're talking about it. So sleep tight, guys. It's good. That's good news. Hey, don't forget to head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All our podcast episodes are there. We do a daily newsletter that you can subscribe to on our website. And don't forget to like and comment and subscribe to our content on whatever platform it is you consume it on. Thanks again for coming back here and joining us, guys. Really appreciate you coming. And have a good week. We'll see you next time.